Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I rank the worst football card designs for 1994. With all of these videos, I tend to start the videos off by talking about how 1994 was the year that they got rid of card borders, and the reason that I keep talking about that is because it really does define the entire year, especially with how cards were designed, but more importantly, the struggle that card designers had in making something distinct. Not that they were competing with each other, because everybody came up with the idea, the same idea, and they were siloed doing their own designs. So it's interesting to see how they solved the problem. That's the variety, but the key is that when you do a borderless card, it's really difficult to make it work. And most of these card companies really didn't quite figure it out. And so that's really the nature of looking at these card designs, is that it's a big sea of card designs that just didn't quite work. And that makes for a lot of really bland cards. It's difficult to make a truly terrible card that's borderless unless the images are just flat out terrible. But making them lackluster is very much par for the course. And so there's no place where this was a bigger issue than in football. And that's really why I keep talking about this, because football was where it was at its height. There are 27 cards that I identify as main card designs. Of those 27 designs, 20 are borderless. The other 7, well, 5 of them are borderless, and then 2 of them have a whole background behind the player, which is like a solid color or something like that. But those aren't really borderless cards because the background has disappeared. So that means that only a quarter of the cards actually have a true design to the cards. The rest of them are either 3/4 bleed or a full bleed card. And when you got that many different ideas, you're definitely going to have a lot of near misses and a lot of just flat out strikeouts. So that's really the problem that we've got here. And on this list, I wanted to pull out 8 cards, and I ended up kind of stumbling into 9 because there are 5 cards that I think are definitely the 5 worst designs. There are 2 very clear honorable mentions, and then there are 2 that are really close. And the 2 that are close are SP and Playoff. And this does a good job of giving you kind of a feel for the problem, because in the case of SP, this is a card that it's kind of ambitious, it's got some fanciness to it, but the design on the side doesn't really work with anything. It doesn't do anything. It's very much in contrast. It has its own nice quality to it, but it doesn't work as a cohesive whole. But the big problem is they have a silver foil surface on the entire card. And that is, it takes whatever potential the card had and it just gets rid of it. The images aren't so well selected, but they do have kind of their own distinction to it. So they got that going on where these cards they don't stand out, but they stand on their own. But when you shift over to Playoff, the Playoff cards are better because, first off, the Tech Chrome works a lot better. Second, the images are better selected for Tech Chrome, but they're not better selected for standing out on their own. So it works better as a cohesive, but it doesn't work well in terms of standing out in your collection. And then there's the logo down at the bottom, and that logo is just dumb. So in both of these cases, they're underwhelming cards, but they're not terrible because the images on the Playoff cards do tend to look pretty good. And the SP cards aren't terrible, they're just letdowns from what SP absolutely should have been. And this is kind of the problem that you have with doing borderless cards, is running into these kinds of problems. But the 2 honorable mentions that I do clearly have on this list, I don't have to worry about that. And the first one is Score. And in Score, I really want to dislike this card. The problem I have is, look, it's a bold, garish card. All that purple, it's got the torn paper effect down at the bottom. It's a bunch of things that I look at and I go, I don't like that they did it. But I actually don't mind the card. It's actually not all that bad, especially compared to like 1992 Score. This does hold up pretty well. But the card itself it's a card that is trying to do something kind of fun and quirky for an audience that is not me. And that's really the problem I have with the card. If the images were better selected, this card set, well, I'm not sure that it would really work any better, because it's all about that border. And at the end of the day, I gotta say, I don't mind the border. It's actually kind of nice. So this is a card I just want to be on this list, but I can't really put it on the list because I don't really have any complaints about it. In fact, I might even like these cards better than SP. I'm not sure. But I think that this is a fair place for it. But the other honorable mention absolutely belongs on the honorable mentions at least, which is Collector's Choice. And Collector's Choice is just a super simplistic card. That's all there is to it. Now, in baseball, I think they did a pretty good job of selecting images. In football, there are a number of images that do look pretty good. But most of the images don't. Well, the big problem with the images that they have in football is that football is difficult to get images where the player pops right out of everything else around him. If you do a good job with selections, you can get images that do that all on their own. But sometimes you got to help it out a little bit, and the images they selected for choice, most of them you needed to help them out. The images do actually work okay if you spend the time to look at the card. You can appreciate it. But this is a card that doesn't have any distinction to it because that white border around the outside, what that does is it depletes the image inside. And so if an image is already kind of busy, it's going to just be a lost cause. If the image is kind of strong, it might lose whatever strength it had. Ironically, if this card had gone borderless and you just had the Collector's Choice logo and then the opposite position logo, if those were floating, these cards would have worked a lot better. I know that because that's basically describing the classic card design for 1994. And obviously I don't have classic on this list. It would have helped out a fair amount, but the images still needed to be a little bit better selected. Still, Collector's Choice is about the ultimate example of bland, but in terms of just a bland card design. In terms of bland cards, well, we're going to be spending a little bit of time with that with the rest of this list, or more specifically, with the list. So at number 5, I have Bowman. And in the case of Bowman, this is a perfect example of you got to do something about design, because the Bowman images actually are pretty decent. I like them. I don't love them, but I do like them. Overall, as you go through the set, so many of these images do tend to read pretty well because Topps did kind of know how to, especially with the saturation, really kind of pull things out for some of these images. But a lot of the images, like with Herman Moore, they were trying too hard. They got cutesy. And those cards just don't feel like football cards. That's a big part of the problem with the set, but the big problem above all else is the fact that there is basically no design. You have the B logo for Bowman, which doesn't fit with anything, and then you have the gold foil hash marks down at the bottom and the text, which just disappears, and you might never notice that on the card unless you take the time to look at the card, and that's a problem. Each one of these cards does not read as a distinct card one to the other to another. It's a big mess of images that all kind of bleed together, and there's no design that stands out and is clear amidst all of this. So it's, unfortunately, this really is a big letdown. The card back, I have to say, for Bowman at this time actually isn't too bad, but the cards are overall bland. On the opposite end of the spectrum, at number 4, I have Pacific Prism. And Prism is anything but bland. Doesn't mean it's great, but it's... Well, so in 1993, when they did their set, it was basically like a picture of a player just pasted onto a prism effect. It really did feel that way. In 94, they did a much better job where the images don't feel like they're plastered on, but the design at the bottom for the name, especially that bar where you have the player's first name, that does a great job of grounding the card and having a design theme to it that reads so well. The problem with this card is that the prism effect is just dumb. I really don't like the prism effect. And I never have liked this design and pattern for the prism. If they had the 93 pattern on here with the 94 design, I think it would have worked pretty well, and I probably wouldn't have even had it on this list. But even though I really like the interplay that they have with the prism, I don't like the prism itself. So this is not a rousing success. At number 3, I've got Collector's Edge. And Collector's Edge, this card, for all the borderless cards, this might be the best design because that text down at the bottom is very, very, very clear, very strong, and I do like it. I don't love it, but I like it. The images actually tend to be somewhat well designed. So you have cards that are distinct, where when you put them together, each card stands out. The images are pretty distinct, which begs the question, why then do I have it here at number 3? And that's because of the card construction. The vinyl plastic cardstock that they use felt really plasticky. And 1994 was a major year where that plasticiness really came through. And these cards all feel kind of muted, and if they feel like something's wrong. That's the issue. And it's a shame because when you look on the back, I love the way that they did these card backs. But the card front, to me, I can't get past the plasticiness. And you want to talk about really bad, when we go to number 2, that's Collector's Edge Excalibur, and the plasticiness is even stronger. But here they also have another problem, which is that the design for the card, that design disappears. You know, silver foil, very fine, but you might not ever see it. You may just see the Edge logo on the card, not even realize they're Excalibur. I don't know why these cards, these cards, when I look at them, I go, well, that's got to be like all Madden. It's got to be that tier, but no, it's a major release. In fact, it's the fancy card for Collector's Edge in 1994, but it sure doesn't seem that way. These cards feel so cheap, but more importantly, there's nothing distinct about them. And for a while, I had this as the worst card design as I was going through this, but at the end of the day, I have to put Pacific as the worst card design for 1994. And that's because at least with Excalibur, they did have a good ability to select images that are distinct, that are strong, that are interesting. With Pacific, they actually do have good images. The problem is that these images would have worked better on a 1995 Gridiron card, not a smaller scale card like this, only they could have worked well on this card if they had actually put a border on. The fact that they have no border, each image has to be strong on its own. And the background is too strong on each one of these images, and so even if the player is clear on his card, he doesn't pop off of the card per se. You combine that with the fact that the thin gold foil on the card front basically disappears, and you've got not a train wreck, but you've got a big pile of meh. There's nothing about this card that's interesting, absolutely nothing. And considering that we came off the high of 1993, this was a thud. That said, this was the beginning of Pacific spending a lot of years doing the same thing. Gold foil and an image that is too busy, and yeah, it's the malaise of mid-1990s Pacific cards. This is the beginning of it. I am not a fan. But that is the list of the worst card designs, as far as I'm concerned, for football in 1994. So let me know in the comments below if you agree with the list, if you feel there's something that needs to be changed, added, or subtracted, or the order, etc. Definitely let me know down below. This does close out the 4 major sports, so the next video I'll be doing for card rankings will be looking at all 4 sports combined together for the worst. So definitely look out for that. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and thank you very much for watching.